March 11th, 2004, the infamous terrorist group detonated 10 bombs almost simultaneously aboard 4 commuter trains in Madrid, Spain. Victims aboard those commuter trains that day represented 18 different countries, at least 193 people dead and 2,000 people injured. On that same day, an American, Brandon Mayfield, an attorney, was at his home in the United States in a suburb of Oregon. So how is it that Brandon Mayfield came to be arrested, held as a material witness just 2 months later, May 6th, 2004, as a perpetrator of the terrorist attack in Madrid, Spain? Well, let's go back to the crime scene. The Spanish National Police, the SNP, actually found fingerprints on a bag of detonators, and the SNP sent those fingerprints to Interpol along with a request that the FBI assist in identifying who those fingerprints may belong to. Before Mayfield's arrest in May 2004, the FBI sent his fingerprints to the SNP on or about April 2nd. And Mayfield's fingerprints were in the database because he was a veteran. He had spent time in the military. The type of fingerprints found on the detonators are called latent fingerprints, and they are amongst the most valuable prints that investigators can lift from a crime scene. Particular fingerprint of interest in this case is LFP17, and there's no dispute that about 20 people had prints similar to LFP17, but fingerprints are unique. Not even identical twins have the same fingerprints. Now, the bombings happened in March 2004. On or about April 2nd, the FBI sent Brandon Mayfield's fingerprints to the SNP. 11 days later, April 13th, the SNP responded to the FBI with negativo. Brandon Mayfield's fingerprint does not match LFP17, but the SNP said they had a suspect, Unani Daoud, an Algerian national who the SNP believed LFP17 belonged to. Not to be deterred, the FBI and the DOJ sent senior fingerprint analysts to the FISA court, and those senior analysts swore in that court that LFP17 belonged to Brandon Mayfield. How is it that Brandon Mayfield became a focus of the FBI? Mayfield was married, had 4 children, and he converted to Islam. He attended mosque regularly. Not only that, but Mayfield had represented one of the Portland 7, Jeffrey Leon Battle. But Mayfield did not represent Battle for waging war against the United States of America. In fact, Mayfield had represented Jeffrey Leon Battle in a custody dispute. And Mayfield had expressed that a few weeks after the bombings, he was afraid for his family's safety because their home had been broken into several times. Well, on May 6th, like I said, the FBI arrested Brandon Mayfield as a material witness. And thanks to the Patriot Act, a person can be arrested as a material witness and held without being charged. The FBI and the DOJ had gone to a FISA court and had sworn in court that LFP17 was a 100% match to Brandon Mayfield. Was that a mistake on the FBI's part or fabricating evidence? During his 2-week incarceration, Mayfield had little to no access to an attorney, and his wife Mona said that they knew the family originally, the jail that he was taken to, but he was transferred and no one knew where he was. Essentially, Brandon Mayfield was in a black hole. Once Mayfield had legal representation, the FBI did not tell Mayfield's attorney that the SNP had determined that fingerprint LFP17 did not belong to Brandon Mayfield. Once the SNP learned of Brandon Mayfield's arrest, it decided to contact the international press. And what it told the international press was that they had actually compared LFP17 to Mayfield Mayfield's fingerprints, and it was not a match. And thanks to that press release, Brandon Mayfield was released. And May 25th, 2014, the judge dismissed the case against him, and the FBI investigated itself and found that it did nothing wrong. The DOJ, the Department of Justice, also investigated itself and said mistakes were made. Well, that was not good enough for Brandon Mayfield. He was not only sick of the FBI and the Department of Justice, he had a problem with the Patriot Act. And so Brandon Mayfield decided to sue. October 4th, 2004, Brandon Mayfield brought a lawsuit against the United States, pretty much for invasion of privacy, and he sought an injunction for the FBI to return or destroy items that it took out of his home. And he went after the law used to detain him is unconstitutional. Listen, the FBI and the Department of Justice not only were allowed to take items that contained his DNA, but his wife's DNA, his toothbrush, her toothbrush, his children's toothbrushes. Not only were they allowed to obtain his employment records, but they were allowed to obtain his medical records under the Patriot Act. The FBI doubled down. They saw dismissal of Brandon Mayfield's lawsuit under national security and said that they needed to keep everything that they had taken out of Mayfield's home for, reference. Mayfield would eventually receive $2 million in a partial settlement, and he was kind of victorious in that the court said that the law used to hold him was unconstitutional. Judge Aiken said in her decision that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which required zero probable cause to surveil and search American citizens and their homes, is unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. Well, the United States of America appealed, and Judge Aiken's decision was overruled by an appellate court because the appellate court decided that Brandon Mayfield had no standing to challenge those two provisions of the Patriot Act. The FBI, by the way, did eventually apologize to Brandon Mayfield, and his receiving $2 million, well, that works out to about $1 million a week. And Mayfield was one of the first to actually get a success in a federal court in challenging two provisions of the Patriot Act, though overturned by an appellate court. And let's not forget to give a shout out to the SNP, who not only did its job in identifying the perpetrator that LFP 17 belonged to, but went even further to protect the integrity of its investigation and hopefully just out of moral duty, bypassed the FBI and the American press and went to the international press to clear Brandon Mayfield's name. If you've stuck with me this far, do me a favor, hit the like button and leave me a comment. Do you think the $2 million is enough for what Mayfield went through? What do you think about FISA courts and the Patriot Act? What do you think about the material witness statute that Mayfield was held under?